responsibility. The police, who's stopping you from killing me? Disasters, fiascos, a loop by PE. The science that we believe on TV. Rich bitches as we think about snitches. Watch the masses move as the masses switches. System distant but barely missed her. My soul intention to save my brothers and sisters. Get up. Just like that. 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 Yeah, that's right, Chuck. You gotta do. You got to tell them just like that.
Hello and welcome to the autumn-winter season of Sitting With Discomfort, online talks exploring race, racism and racialized experience. To contextualize, Sitting With Discomfort came about after the tragic murder of George Floyd, and we acknowledge that the violence and injustice brought about on people of African descent didn't start there and neither did it stop. Sitting With Discomfort hopes to maintain the momentum for and promotion of anti-racism in an age of potential change. Whether you regard it as a movement or simply a moment, we feel that ongoing attention to a cause that has been invisible and silent to the majority of people until now needs to be brought into the spotlight and remain there until there is change. Now, why Sitting With Discomfort, you may say? We know that discussing race and calling out racism is an uncomfortable topic of conversation for those with lived experience and those coming to terms with their complicity in it for the first time. We hope that these sessions will enable a solidarity of thoughts and through the experience of mutual discomfort, a deeper understanding of one another may arise. For those of you joining us for the first time, welcome. And for those of you returning, thank you. In our last session on August 6th, psychologist Malcolm Phillips inspired the idea of lasting protest being championed by artists and creatives. Tonight, we have the opportunity to hear from two artists about how race and identity feeds into their creative process. But before we do that, I just want to ask you to share with us where you're joining us from so we have a sense of who is in the room. So our first speaker today is Isaac Ouro-Gnao, and Isaac is a Togolese British dance artist, writer and poet, as well as a freelance journalist. His impact in the dance world has been multifaceted, working as a performer, scriptwriter, producer, marketeer, and reviewer for esteemed hip-hop theatre artists and companies. Amongst his credits, and there are many, are the wonderful body politic performance that I saw last year, called Father Figurine, which was incredible. And I know that Isaac will be talking about his creative process. So he'll be sharing some of that with us. His talk today is called Getting It Wrong, Lessons Learned from Creating Work Around Assimilation. Isaac, when you're ready, please feel free to start.
Oh, hi everyone. Thanks for having me. Hope you can hear me okay. A lot of what I'll be talking about today is to do with a different work called the Ouro Complex that I've been creating since 2018. And I'll be talking about lessons learned, essentially, because the piece is about assimilation in many ways. But yeah, essentially, the Ouro Complex is a part dance, part theatre, and part visual arts body of work, and it aims to uncover the intergenerational discriminatory label and its effect on mental health and identity. And I say intergenerational because the sentiment, you know, black on the outside, white on the inside, has existed for, I mean, decades, if not longer, with things like Bounty, coconut, chalk ice. I'm sure if we all sit down and write it in the chat, we could probably come up with dozens of things. But I wanted to create that work to question a few things. I wanted to question how and where the term was used. And I'm aware it's used to describe those who essentially are assimilated or are assimilating. So if you're black, and I'm using that term loosely, like black heritage, etc., and maybe you are, you know, well-spoken or educated or tend to live in a certain area, whether it's gentrified or not, and you're labeled that term because you seem white, you know, you're a sellout, things like that. I wanted to question those things. I also wanted to question who uses these things? Is it always external to the cultures, like black and brown people, or is it also used by certain white people who have a proximity to black people and black cultures? I wanted to question the impact it has on us, whether it on a mental health basis or on an identity basis, because the labels are packed and are harmless, you know. I mean, they're packaged, sorry, as harmless, but they are packed full of issues. And I wanted just to unravel those things, whether it's to do with certain attributes like I just said, language and education be attributed to whiteness. I wanted to kind of question those things. And I also wanted to look at how to heal the traumas faced from that label, and how to kind of take ownership of our identities, no matter the place or environment, essentially to be our authentic selves and make our own choices. So looking at things like code switching, for example, does it happen out of choice, out of habit, out of necessity, or is it dictated by external factors, our environments and things like that? It's just to kind of bring awareness to who we are and how we are in certain predominantly white spaces. So how did I do that? I think I can just jump straight into the extracts from the work. The first thing you're going to see is part of the performance side of things. It is the second section of the hour-long work, and it kind of just explores the interaction between the Oreo label and a white space, essentially. But we're gonna have a look at it. It's just a minute extract coming in from the 5th minute mark. So if we can move to 5 minutes, we'll have a look at that section. Yeah. Is the sound working? Ah, there's no sound.
Apologies for that.
And the University of Oxford has paid tribute to its first black student. But who was Christian Cole, and what was life like for him at the time when being black at the university wasn't merely unusual, but remarkable? Cole was always likely to turn heads when he arrived in Oxford to read classics. It was 1873, and he was a 21-year-old black man from Waterloo, Sierra Leone, studying alongside young men from the elite families of Victorian England. His arrival predated the institution of the university's first women's college by 6 years. The city must have appeared a daunting place for Cole, said Dr. Robin Darwell-Smith, an archivist from the University College, Oxford. For a lot of people, he would have been the first black African they had ever encountered. He said, "Okay, that's enough, thank you."
Okay, we can stop that there and just jump straight to the second extract, which is a short film that I shared as part of the performance, which comes exactly next from what you've just seen. We'll just jump to that.
Can you see? Can you see the darkness in me? Perforated black on me. Packaged in trinkets for your consumption. Ambiguous ingredients for your assumptions to run amok with. It's bitter. See? In need of more lightness, palatable sweetness, or whipped indoctrination with a hint of education filling, low fat and debt free, of course. Pseudo emancipated shells molded out of godlessness, pressed into godly ideals, ready to populate taste buds. Wrapped, boxed, tick. Undress me, dip me in your milk, dampen my complexion, whitewash my being into non-existence. Why? It's quite simple. Oreos are easy to consume, are they not? It's bitter. See? In need of more lightness. Wrapped, boxed, tick. Undress me, dip me in your milk, dampen my complexion, whitewash my being into non-existence. Why? It's quite simple. Oreos are easy to consume, are they not? Undress me, dip me in your milk, dampen my complexion, whitewash my being into non-existence. Why? Nemanya kpɔkpɔ anyadu wotsɔ numayemayewo kpla nam abe aɖabatɔ ene si na be meve ɖuɖu la tse alo ehiã be afɔ vie emavivi anyadu alo wodem zome wodem mama dampen my complexion, whitewash my being into non-existence. Undress me, dip me in your milk, dampen my complexion, whitewash my being into non-existence. Why? It's quite simple. Oreos are easy to consume, are they not?
Cool. I'll ask for your thoughts about those two things later on. But essentially, with the Oreo complex and the short film Palatable, I was interested in the idea of complicity, the idea of violence, the idea of self-editing, self-censoring, and of protest. Fanon's Black Skin, White Masks identify that violence could be observed in essentially two categories. So that's the violence of the colonizer through the destruction of body, psyche, culture, etc., and the violence of the colonized to regain their dignity, sense of self, and history. And the Oreo complex was essentially exploring these two things, but also the violence against the self, internalized racism, the protest against it, and ways to break away from it. And I was really interested in, again, going back to the definition and the synopsis I use of the discriminatory label Oreo and the imagery that it brought, and kind of looking at how it survives generations via Bounty and Coconut as well, and kind of trying to unravel all of these things through that process. So it was essentially looking at white supremacy, internalized racism, and kind of reclaiming and identifying the self in order to achieve that ownership of self that I was talking about earlier. So all of this, and part of the talk, it is questioning what I got wrong. What is it about this body of work? What is it about the questioning of assimilation, of identity and race? Did I get it wrong? And looking back at it retrospectively, I think I got my approach of assimilation wrong. What I did was critique how people question assimilation rather than critiquing assimilation itself. For example, when someone calls someone else a sellout or calls them, a bounty, etc., instead of questioning both that name calling or that discrimination and maybe the nuances behind it, the hidden truths behind it, what I did was essentially attack the ways people express themselves in that sense. So I was, in a nutshell, asking my audience for silence and complicity. You know, don't call each other sellouts. Not like that. You know, promoting understanding, openness, and liberalism, but kind of looking at assimilation without critique. And I think not doing that became a bit problematic. I also realized that my lived experience was clouding my judgment, because I created this work because it's something I've experienced myself. I'm sure you can already tell from how I talk, how I enunciate, and things like that. It's something that I've come across and been labelled with, and I mean my lived experience was clouding my judgment because, in my worldview, assimilation is it's a forced thing. It's something you do to survive and to thrive, or attempt to thrive in whatever environment you exist in. It's it's forced by external factors. It's not necessarily a choice. What I didn't realize outside of my lived experience is sometimes those things are choices. You know, assimilation can be a choice. You know, not every Black or brown person or person of color is positioned as oppressed or without power. Some do have the choice in how much or how often they place themselves with or towards white supremacy, or like their proximity to it, how much they uphold those systems and how much they partake in it, dip into it, in and out of it, for example. So my lived experience was quite narrow in the sense of assimilation is something done out of pain, out of struggle, and not out of choice. So consequently, I also ignored the intersections of class with race, you know, only focusing on my perspective, for example, the perspective of the oppressed. And I lean on Ghislaine Kinuani's words about assimilation politics, and she says that silence is the cost of assimilation. Silence is also the consequence of racial and intergenerational trauma. Silence is the price you have to pay to enjoy the comfort of the master's house. And silence is forced, it is projected, but silence is also introjected. Silence is internalized, and because of that, we self-censor to appease the masters within ourselves. And it's quite ironic looking back at both the extracts, which kind of question the idea of, you know, self-censoring and, you know, not being viewed in one way or another, kind of taking ownership of how we're viewed, how we perceive ourselves, breaking away from that kind of pseudo-schizophrenic feeling we get when we're labeled these things, or we kind of have to embody different parts of different things in order to exist in environments, or whether they're predominantly white buildings, organizations, or in my perspective, it's always been like creative building, creative spaces. So how do we break away from that? But in my attempt of trying to break away from that, I was also ignoring, and I was complicit in repackaging the idea of white supremacy and proximity to it in a different sense. So in the first extract, you heard the audience member reading about Christian Cole, which was the first Black scholar in Oxford University. And what I did was have that news article be read and kind of superimpose who he is or who he was as an Oreo, as a bounty, as a coconut, because those attributes of being elite or of being educated are seen as that, and kind of reimagining how he would have existed in that space, what type of self-editing would he have to do. But also by doing that, I was reinforcing the idea that I needed, or he needed to do that in order to thrive in a space such as Oxford University, which is predominantly white. So again, there's an interesting relationship between white supremacy and self-censoring. And I think, again, going back to the idea of getting it wrong, I was unaware of the size of the task at hand, because I think personally, as an artist, and I know a lot of artists who, meaning well, would like take on such a large thing as racism or identity politics or mental health, and despite their research and despite my research, there's still a huge chunk of it missing that not only contradicts what I'm trying to do artistically, but also kind of makes it void. And it doesn't mean I should stop creating. It doesn't mean I should stop exploring these things. But I think highlighting where we get it wrong as artists is important, because we then show the progress of that work or of artistic careers, because no one is holier than thou from the get-go. No one has it figured out from the get-go. It's by creating these things and learning from it that we can then change that process and learn and just improve on what we're doing. So that's been what my process has been since, and kind of reimagining. And right now I'm in a new process where I'm taking these thoughts on board, looking closer into assimilation and identity politics, and trying just to broaden my perspective as much as be one artist with their perspective and their, sense of self. Because what I was, again, reinforcing earlier was having to shed rather than having to uphold what we have in the past and then improve upon it. So yeah, essentially that's what I wanted to communicate with you all, and I'm really interested in what you think. One, by the work themselves, and also by your thoughts about the idea of getting it wrong, and also unpicking the idea of assimilation with me. Yeah, I think I got through that relatively fast, but I'm going to put the I guess the thoughts back onto you when we get into the discussion, and I will hand over to Mariam, if that's okay with you all.
Thank you, Isaac. That's absolutely fine. That was really, really incredible, very powerful, particularly your thoughts around assimilation, but also the idea of silence and the need for us to censor ourselves. Very, very powerful. Larry Achiampong is a Jarmaine Award-nominated artist with a BA in Mixed Media Fine Art and a Master's in Sculpture. His work examines his communal and personal heritage, in particular the intersection between pop culture, the post-colonial position, and constructions of the self. Larry is also a tutor on the Photography Master's Programme at the Royal College of Art and currently serves on the Board of Trustees for INIVA, the Institute of International Visual Arts. Larry, when you're ready, we'll be honoured to hear you speak.
Sure thing, Mariam. Thank you very much. Thank you also, Isaac, for the presentation, and for all of you who've joined tonight. Looking forward to hopefully talking further following our presentations and sharing. Okay, so I wanted to, for my talk, just, I guess, amongst my practice, focus on a very particular project titled Relic Traveller, which I've been working on over the last probably 4 years. It was established in 2017, but I was working on it prior to that. It's a project that has been realized piece by piece across a range of media, including video, sound, performance, objects, prose. And I guess really at the heart of the project for me were some burning kind of questions or ideas that I wanted to approach. I wanted to think a lot about the kind of like now period at the time that we were living in, but I guess of course connects to now, at that point in time, the Brexit votes were kind of like, or the Brexit kind of, you know, voting was on its way. For those of you, of course, who are not based in the UK, Brexit was a vote for the British people to vote whether or not to stay within the EU. And I felt very strongly about where I knew that the UK was going to be going. I just knew it was going for leave, based on, I guess, you know, the history of imperialism, like celebrated, whether that's from education right through to various structures of racism that exist, that are embedded within Western society, especially the UK. But I was also quite interested in exploring ideas around, I guess, borders kind of opening up, and there being a lack of fractures of relationships, but connecting through culture. And so through that, I was thinking a lot about a passport program which the African Union have been working on for years. It's still in its gestation, which would allow Africans to travel amongst the various nations in the African continent with no problem. So of course, with something like you know, Brexit, you're looking at you're essentially looking at, you know, the closing of culture and ideas, and sharing this idea of kind of like island kind of nation mentality, which I would argue has inspired you know, nationalism to increase across the West. Without that, it's arguable as to how far Donald Trump would have got, because within that same year, of course, he was voted into the presidency. So I wanted to start with a quote by a writer whose work I really respect, named Nnedi Okorafor. Actually, I'm trying to, oops, I can't focus entirely on it because Zoom has kind of like taken over part of the screen. But I think you can gather from what it is that Nnedi Okorafor is talking about, Nigerian American author who's written issues of like Black Panther, the Black Panther comic, as well as her own series of novels, including Binti and Phoenix and more. She, of course, is talking a lot about the way in which, you know, science fiction through popular culture as we know it is rooted very much within the West, or particularly from perspectives of white men. And with Relic Traveller, I wanted to be able to really complicate that kind of conversation by setting a kind of an idea of a speculative future in which the African continent is at a point in time where prosperity, harmony, and independence are really kind of pushing hard. And whereas within the West, as a result of the increase of nationalism, culturally, economically, and more, the global West as we know it is on a point of decline. This slide, of course, which you see before you, is still from John Okomfra's Last Angel of History, a work which for me is very instrumental through my practice in exploring ideas around technology, its relationship with identity, Blackness. I would say, of course, with artists such as that, and Samuel Delaney, Octavia Butler, and more. You know, the term Afrofuturism, of course, certainly in some respects has inspired me, but I wouldn't say personally that for me the term Afrofuturism is one of which my work kind of really fits within. I think namely because Mark Derry, the author who coined the term, you know, is an American white guy. And I certainly do believe that whilst my project, for example, is one that is definitely far reaching and is for anybody to explore and to take on, it's certainly made in mind with Black people in thought. You know, one of the things I thought a lot about in the earlier kind of inception of the project was creating space stories for my children and other young Black children, looking at things that I perhaps wouldn't have, I wasn't able to see as a kid. Now, of course, we have the likes of the Black Panther film, which was released a couple of years ago. But, before that, I would argue that there was nothing that kind of came in that kind of that magnitude. And even then, to expect one kind of film to tick all the boxes, as it were, I think is too much of a thing to kind of like ask. So as I said, the project, of course, is a speculative one, and with that, kind of central to the project is a series of films. So there are 4 films that exist within the series. If we have enough time, I'll play a tiny excerpt from one of the films. You have Relic 0, Relic 1, Relic 2, and Relic 3. Each of the films are set within different environments. But you kind of gather from through seeing the films, particularly starting off with Relic 0, is the viewer kind of experiences the situation almost as if they are the relic traveler themselves, and they're listening to perhaps a message or even a distress signal being sent by an unnamed character who talks about histories of colonization and its relationship with globalization. And through the series of the Relic Traveler films, what you hear are a range of monologues. And what's really important about these monologues or these vocal testimonies is that the Relic Travelers have been sent outside of the African Union to pick up these testimonies that would have been left around various parts of the other planet. And the idea and the reason for that is for the African Union to best learn of these experiences of oppression in order to govern a future that is really directed from the bottom up perspective. So through these stories, there is a kind of perhaps like relocating or picking up of remains which have been pushed to the side or perhaps almost nigh erased. So the slide that I'm showing you here perhaps goes a bit more into the philosophy behind the work. Like I said, as much as there's respect for artists who perhaps align themselves with Afrofuturism, for me, I would say that this project, as well as various aspects of my work, whether that's audio-based, performance, and so on, feed itself into a term which I call Sanko time. So Sanko time essentially brings together 2 words. The first being Sankofa, which is a word from Ghana, from a language called Tree. So I originate from Ghana. My family is, my mother and father were born in Ghana, in Kumasi. So I'm Ashanti by origin. And one of the teachings or the learnings that upon like many is the phrase that is used, Sankofa, meaning to go back and to retrieve it, to go back and to retrieve something that may have been lost in time, or you could have perhaps been separated through any kind of situation. And then of course the word time. The reason why I coined this term was through my upbringing, which although growing up in East London, my mother and father, they would talk to me in Tree. They would, they would teach myself and my siblings Ashanti customs. And one of the things was about, never forgetting yourself, never forgetting who you are, where you come from. With that, my mother would tell a lot of stories, whether they were folklorist stories in relation to the likes of Nyame and Anansi. Some of you may know through certain aspects of popular culture, but really just not kind of losing where you come from, and that is kind of said in a very kind of free, open sense, not simply just what you may have known before and forgot, but actually what we don't know. And so that's where I feel Relic Traveler really sets itself up in terms of having a conversation that tries to, I think, create a moment not simply just for people within the African continent, but those of the other diaspora, to really get a conversation going amongst conversations that of course are already happening. So it's something that I feel, as far as I'm concerned, is something that I want to contribute. It's an image from Relic 2, which was created last year. And then Relic 3, which is the latest work in the project. I decided to kind of, put this, I guess, this little excerpt from a scene within Back to the Future, one of my favorite, I guess, like sci-fi films like that I watched growing up, because this particular scene where Marty is like looking at an image with him and his siblings, and he's talking to Doc Brown about this idea of erasure as a result of the kind of space-time continuum being affected through him time traveling. And of course, I didn't really think about it as a kid, but over time, I guess in the way that we digest any aspect of culture, it really kind of like dawned on me about this understanding of erasure, of being erased from existence. And of course, the histories of the transatlantic slave trade, colonization, capitalism, globalization even, is a set of violences upon one another which create this erasure of which many of us are dealing with, are submerged within, are fighting against. And so when I kind of rewatched that film now, like it has this totally kind of almost like different understanding. I think that obviously that happens a lot in various aspects of culture. You read something, time passes, and you read that again. But I found that was quite important to this in terms of what the project of Relic Traveller is doing. So moving on, as I said, the project it covers a range of media with these images. As you can see, the Pan-African flag for the Relic Travellers Alliance designs, which were created with the help of Wumi Lawa Sebakan, a good friend of mine and also illustrator. The intention was to initially create these patch logos that would exist on the Relic Travellers outfits. However, I was invited by Somerset House as a resident artist at the time to create a flag that would stand on top of their building for a few months. And to begin with, I almost entirely turned down the offer because, first of all, I'd never created a flag, and then secondly, knowing a good amount of the history, the colonial history involved, it just didn't feel like I could really make or say anything that would really help add important conversation. But having had time to think about these small ideas I had for the patch logos, I thought, well, what if a kind of beacon is created on top of that, the kind of like pillar of sorts, or where the flag stands? What if there is something that people, especially Black people, can kind of like look up to and think, wow, like there's a message in that. There's something which I can perhaps like kind of connect to, and without even entering a gallery space, I should mention, because class is such a big deal when it comes to art, or contemporary art, as it were. It stops people from backgrounds very similar to my own, especially having come from a background of being part of the underclass, working class. I never grew up going to galleries. Many of my peers did. I never went to a contemporary art gallery until I was an adult, till I was like around 18 or so. So to be able to say something outside, or in a way that is not confined within these spaces, very much appeals to me. And that also speaks for the audio works that I create, a lot of which are available online for people to download for free. As you can see, the previous image was from a group exhibition at Whitechapel Gallery. This was also for the Frieze Sculpture Park in Regent's Park during Frieze. It's a detail there. And then also this is for a group show which I did in Germany. I believe the name of the organization is ZKM. So that was for a group show which brought together international artists whose works kind of linked potentially with Afrofuturism. And then here, there's also, of course, a still from the Hubtones music video for the musical artist Kamasi Washington, and the film directed by Jen Inkru, a good friend of mine and also a filmmaker and artist. And the reason why I put this slide in here really was to perhaps to talk about my interest in collaboration. Now, of course, even looking across the works that I've shown as well, and also at this point, I'd like to say big thanks to all the people who worked on the project, the likes of Nefertiti Aboshi Shandorf, Louise Searle, of course, Humi Lao Sebekan, Shiraz Beju, and plenty others. In this case, Jen kind of got in contact and asked me if I'd be interested in showing the flag within the video that she was creating for this really special project. And I just was really excited about how these unified voices in terms of ourselves would be coming together to create something that on a cultural level kind of, you know, was perhaps doing more than maybe an art exhibition could. And I'm just being honest about that. You know, again, sure, I'm an artist, I create work that sometimes goes within gallery spaces, but you know, throughout my trajectory, I've always been quite critical of what institutions can do and what they can't do. And in this case, we were able to do something special in fusing various elements of art with pop culture through something very accessible that people could see online, the likes of YouTube and so on. Then moving on perhaps to some stuff that's perhaps a bit more recent. I'm actually not sure if this work is actually still up in Westminster, for those of you who are based in London. But this project was a commission from Art on the Underground, Transport for London, to essentially create designs that would remix the iconic London Underground roundel, but also be placed within Westminster for a few months from November of last year, 2019, through to February of this year. I can't tell you whether, you know, they're still around, although the idea was that they were to be taken down in February. And I know that as a result of coronavirus, that these works in the end stayed up for longer, and I've still been receiving images. But to perhaps talk a little bit more about the idea behind the work was really to try to take the energy of the Pan-African flags and to infuse that into a range of designs that would be featured throughout every single roundel within the station. And this for me was really like a huge honor, not simply just for the, you know, not for the purpose of, you know, being invited to showcase an artwork in such an iconic place, but really I think about the social and the political importance of that. You know, it being shown within Westminster, where of course, you know, Houses of Parliament are, having a work that at the point in time where you know, the hard Brexit was being kind of like pushed for, that this work would be erected and would stand for a good while. That really meant a lot. And also there were special posters which were designed and put across, I believe, around 270 of the various underground stations that exist. Again, you know, carrying on from the point that I made about art kind of moving beyond simply just being, you know, access within a space of white walls and grey floors. This this was really important to me as somebody who has used public transport since they were, you know, a kid, you know, and so many elements that connect to me and my own personality, the sound of the grind of steel to, you know, the hustle and bustle of people moving from day to day, but also those moments of just kind of like pausing or contemplation, or in a way, kind of joining on with what Isaac was talking about earlier in terms of these moments of silence. Those things really matter to me. And that's where I hope sometimes the things that I make can perhaps complement a person's moment that they're having to themselves. Okay, again, moving on to even more current imagery or work that I'm producing at the moment. So I kind of said to myself after creating Relic 3, which is the fourth film in the Relic Traveler series, that I would kind of take a break from, you know, doing Relic Traveler project kind of focused stuff, because there's so many things I want to do, so many things I want to kind of like challenge myself, which I have actually done. There are works that have been produced that are still in gestation, that are not part of the Relic Traveler universe. But one thing that I'd wanted to experiment with for a long time was illustration and animation, and in knowing that Wumi Alawasebakan, who, as I mentioned earlier, had worked with me on the flags, has been working a lot within illustration, particularly through like the use of graffiti forms and so on. Whenever we get together, we always talk about science fiction. We always especially talk about versions of science fiction that we would create in the form of animations and so on. And so I approached Wumi about the idea of creating animated segments or still imagery that could be a part of that Relic Traveler universe. This example we have here is from the Art Review magazine, which was, I think, just released yesterday. And that contains some of the images, the concept imagery that Wumi created through my direction, and then also a new script, which is part of a new film, which is part of the Relic Traveler series. I'm laughing because I said to myself I would, you know, focus on making other projects, but this new work titled Reliquary 2 is quite different in that the testimony that you hear or will hear comes from myself, and it's of course written very much within the context of now, what we're surrounded with in terms of coronavirus, and how that's affecting many of us, how that's affecting you know, Black people, being in the UK, for example, 3%, making up 3% of the UK, yet being 4 times more likely to catch coronavirus. So, you know, being a young Black parent and somebody who is also responsible to many people who are immunocompromised, to say that I've been nervous during these last few months, and even now with the opening up of schools, is probably an understatement. But with the work, which I think really kind of speaks as a letter, perhaps with the kind of energy with the likes of Ta-Nehisi Coates' Between the World and Me, is really a conversation that I'm having with my 2 children. I'm trying to perhaps talk to them about my fragility. I'm trying to talk to them about the things that I can't control, but at least to be able to leave them something. And you know, legacy is a very strong kind of, you know, pillar in everything that I do. I think especially since being a parent, which I've been for, gosh, it will be 12 years in a few days' time. How that makes me think about what I do. Not that everything didn't count before, but everything that I do make, it has to, there has to be something that is being said. And, you know, time, in some cases is all we have, but also time doesn't belong to us. Is also something that is said within this script. So I guess I'd like to stop there. I'm going to play an excerpt from one of the other Relic Traveller films, Relic 3, and then yeah, we'll proceed to, I guess, the next poll or kind of conversation and questions. Okay.
Kwame Mensah many jobs. We call him this because he does so many jobs. He traveled this land same time as us, but he somehow find work, lots, just like that. He say he want for take all the money Queen and Empire take from us and return it home. I don't think he make it back home. I worry about him. His body won't go on forever doing this work, back to back, and he no rest. He not eat real food, only this oily fish and chip business. He say if he spend money to make home food, then he dey take home less money. He's stuck in deep, like Duffy. Every day is a working day. The factory took so many in, those of us that migrated here. They know we need the money, and that no one else will do the type of work they are asking to be done. It is dangerous. You read in the papers that this country goes crazy over health and safety. But I heard that the last wave of migrant workers were fired after one of them died in the plastics packing machine. You wouldn't have heard about it in the paper because an immigrant's life has no value. Replaceable, desperate to work, expandable, untraceable, no papers, a ghost. Kojo said the poor fool probably couldn't read English and trap himself in there. Kojo has no heart for the dead, nor does he have a brain at the best of times. That machine required 2 people to operate it. Deep down, everyone knows this nameless man was murdered. We are just too afraid to admit it. This place isn't just full of immigrants. They have some of their own working here as well. We call them poor English. They seem to be somewhere in the middle where rank is concerned. Not good enough to sit at the table with the important whites, yet they keep themselves away from us. The boss says it's better this way because fights are always happening amongst you lot. Or maybe the boss knows that if we all got on, he wouldn't be able to control us the way he does. One of the poor English does come to talk to us from time to time. His name is Tom.
Gary, feel free to finish that off. That's absolutely fine.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay,
Absolutely.
sure. I'll play the rest.
Sometimes he makes me laugh, and sometimes his ignorance makes me want to strangle the kid. I remember the first time he introduced himself to me and Kojo when he proclaimed to love rice and pea, and that you lot are all right, but I don't get on well with the Pakis. And they say the best education in the world is here. Wasia, stupid fool. "12-hour shifts, half-hour lunch, and no other breaks. The boss says we are not allowed to leave the premises when we have lunch. Kojo says it makes no sense to be outside anyway, and that we don't want to be walking target for immigration to come and chuck us into their vans. To think this is the freedom we desperately travel both land and sea to attain, to become a tax-avoidable workforce, paid less than speed. No benefit, no pension. Even the poor whites have access to this. Yet we are rewarded with the speed when we walk the streets at daytime. Don't ask me what's in store for us at night. I don't think I'll last here. I saw something very bad the other day. I caught the boss propositioning Nanaya in his office when I was on break. If you are not nice to me, you may not have a job here after all, as he ushered her to sit on his lap. I heard this happened a lot before I got here. As much as I disliked the boss, Kokonsa was what I thought of these stories. All of a sudden, the hearsay falls into place, and I think about Tom, his kinky hair, his familiar look, and the realization that he's neither white nor black. The work he foredo was spoken about like legend. 16-hour shifts across 3 jobs and no rest. he said he want for take the money home. But now he walk away with nothing for the take his life. Kwame Mensah Opoku.
Thank you, Larry, for sharing. It's always inspiring to hear you talk about your works. That's wonderful. And also to share the power of stories. So thank you very much.
No
So Isaac and Larry, I mean, how was that sort of reflecting and sharing, especially in the sort of framers of art as protest?
I'll let you go first, Isaac.
Yeah, I mean, it's quite interesting. I think with my work, I was kind of looking at protest against almost the self as well as external factors, or predominantly the white spaces my work would be shown in, but kind of starting on myself first before kind of looking outwardly. But it was just really interesting to reflect on the process that happened in 2018 when the work first started being created, and where it is now and what protest looks like. It was quite interesting for Larry to talk about African futurism, because it's something I've been studying since January, in the idea of kind of reconfiguring protest in my work, and how you can look forward without kind of embodying negative practices to kind of highlight the things you want to protest against. And I think one thing that that stuck with me in kind of like the learning from the mistakes I've made is not necessarily embodying trauma or embodying the issues you want to tackle. There are different ways to approach that, and different ways to highlight that, and different ways to protest it without centralizing or centering that trauma itself, or that issue itself. So it's quite, yeah, it's been an interesting process reflecting on that, and I'm sure it'll be continuous as well.
Thank you. Larry?
Oh gosh, yeah, I'll try and be brief with it, because I think it's one of those questions that, you know, you could run off with for a long time. But I was just noting some things down whilst Isaac was talking. I guess thinking about protest in the age of coronavirus, really, and especially what has fortunately happened with Black Lives Matter, in that the message has been far more mobilized than any other point in its history, really. And that kind of thing was only possible because of a virus, which is kind of crazy. I mean, you know, the movement has been around for years. People have listened, but not enough. And so I think the world was probably shocked to see that pick up momentum. It's a shame that it's taken more Black people to die in order for there to be people listening, especially white people, those that are privileged as well, monetarily and so on. You know, also the likes of coming towards the art scene, the likes of, you know, Tate and South Bank, and the messed up stuff that they've done with, you know, getting rid of a workforce that arguably without them, those buildings wouldn't exist and no one would go inside of them. You know, I'm saying this as somebody who's done that kind of work for years in the earlier days of my career. The way that treatment has been going down is disgusting. And I certainly align myself with those workers, those people. And again, to mention, you know, a lot of Black people, a lot of trans and queer people have been, you know, left with no kind of plan B, as it were, when it comes to work and jobs, which I think is disgusting. If you think about the fact that the government, you know, put a bailout plan together, not saying that the money was loads and loads, but it was an amount where, you know, you expect leadership from that type of level with the likes of Tate and South Bank. So, you know, that kind of thing is kind of like moment for reflection in people, you know, kind of like being indoors as a result of lockdown measures, and hopefully as a result of that heightened kind of you know, criticality in looking towards trying to build a future in a moment in time, which is really difficult to see any kind of future, really. So yeah, that's what I thought.
Thank you.
No
Just reflecting, Isaac, on what you said about on trauma, your work, and then the idea of revisiting trauma. In the kind of development of work or the expression of experience as an artist, there is this thing of having to revisit the pain and the struggle. Is it worth it?
It really isn't. It really isn't. And I still see myself as early careers, because I only have a few works to my name, but the early stuff have been about kind of expressing that trauma and then trying to escape from that, or trying to heal that trauma. And I think it's quite detrimental to the process itself, because just by reimagining or reliving that process, you are, if not subconsciously, then consciously reinforcing that as a process for both your audience and yourself, regardless of how much you try to then escape from it. I think the root remains that thing, that trauma or that issue to tackle. And personally, it has affected my mental health as well, having to continuously over a long period of time dive into a space of trauma, looking at the work that you've seen, Father Figurine. That in itself was such an eye-opening process, because at the start of it, it was kind of looking at the practice of method acting, And then by the end of it, it was purely character based, because through the process, we realized how detrimental it was to embody such a heightened piece of pain, which is, for those who don't know, father figuring is about a father and son's broken relationship, and kind of both of them managing their mental health with each other, or not really with each other in the same space, but kind of distant. And yeah, kind of touring with that work and embodying it every night kind of took a toll. And I think we can move away from not showing trauma on stage, but we can talk about it, we can explore it, we can critique it, we can try and heal from it without centering that trauma. Is something I've realized, and maybe it's not the same for a lot of people, but I think in my case, and I would argue it for a lot of others as well, it's important not to center trauma on stage or in art, but to reference to it, critique it, to use it, I guess, in a different sense.
And then I wonder how you do that. How do you sort of reference it without embodying it, especially as a dancer?
Yeah, good question. It's something I'm still wrestling with. I think recently I've come across just the idea of shifting. What am I trying to say about it, and kind of shifting that to be the center of the artwork or the performance, and leaving the trauma as another reference, or on the periphery, essentially. I imagine it quite visually. So the thing I'm trying to say is centered, and the thing I'm talking about is external, because we can all understand or allude to it, depending on how expressive I am in my performance. You will know the trauma I'm talking about, or depending on my skills or the skills of the artistic team, you will know about the trauma that's being explored without it being, front and center, and also perhaps having a negative effect on you as the audience, or as you as the viewer. So I'm very sensitive to that nowadays, and I think it takes a lot of hard work, because it's quite easy to just say center what you're trying to say, but what does that look like? What does that sound like? I guess it depends on every artist's artistic process to figure that out.
So I'm also thinking about what you said about assimilation being a choice, and I wonder, is it a choice? Especially if it is done out of pain and struggle, it then feels part of the process then, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say it's both a choice and isn't a choice. I think depending on where we're placed in terms of race, class, those two things, it can be, in my case, with the spaces I've had to operate in and work in, it's the only option I have. Whereas, as I mentioned in the talk, it's kind of, once I open my view to the dynamics of class and race, I realize sometimes it is a choice. Sometimes people have that proximity to it, where they're not surrounded by it, but they can partake, kind of like a culture. You could just dip in and out through choice, depending on I guess proximity to that. But I think mostly and often it isn't a choice, but do we then keep choosing it? I think that's where I've arrived. Am I at a point where I have to keep choosing it in order to thrive, or can I look back, reflect, and critique it, and try and escape from it?
So even for me, the idea of assimilation is linked in some ways to erasure of self, because one has to assimilate to this majority environment. So Larry, I want to bring you in there and just talk about the idea of being erased from existence and how that is linked into racialized experience. If you could expand on that.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, there's I didn't talk about it in the presentation. It's just too much stuff to mention. But there's a new project that I was commissioned to produce with an organisation called The Line, whom are based in Greenwich by Royal Dock, and they worked with the Emirates Line to approach me in thinking about creating an artwork that considers the history of the Royal Dock. I was very much interested in the relationship with the Meridian line and how that connects to Accra. And so to think about those histories of trade, of technology, of course, the relationship with slavery, but also the contemporary relationship, in that these kind of stories are not really spoken about. You know, the histories of the likes of, you know, Lloyd's of London and you know, Oxford and Cambridge universities, and their fingers within the pies, or their pies, as it were, of slave ownership or benefiting, are not spoken of. So this sound work, for me, was an opportunity to merely kind of not even really scrape the surface, but to agitate conversation in a way where I could then create you know, some interesting beats and compositions, and hey, you know, maybe some young black kids would be interested in listening to that, you know, and I mean that, you know, just the you know, the question or the situation regarding erasure is such a difficult one, because, you know, there's so much, there are so many questions to try to answer or to try to deliver to. That was one of the tough things of working on the Transport for London project. It just never, it never appealed to me as a project to simply just make something and put it there. I know artists who do that, fine, that's what they do. For me, it just doesn't work that way. But being an artist, I think, is a responsibility. There's a privilege with that, regardless of all the craziness I've had to, you know, deal with and still continue to deal with as a young black man from, you know, working or lower class kind of position. But there is a privilege in potentially having opportunities to talk in places where otherwise, as another kind of civilian, I'll probably be told I'm crazy or shut up, or, do you know what I mean? So so I take that very seriously. And it was great to hear Isaac kind of talk earlier about, or just now, about, you know, the internalizing of trauma. How do you do that? Do you do so or do you not? Or how do you work with that? And I'd certainly say that, you know, when in my years of having, you know, graduated from my MA, it was really tough trying to deal with a lot of that, to unpack that. You know, I wasn't given the tools, and I'm sure, you know, plenty young black, you know, budding artists or even students, some of which I've you know, taught myself, found difficult to deal with, because the environment that they're surrounded by doesn't cater to them or doesn't really care about them, because there isn't much there for them. One thing I want to add to that, though, I think, which is important to what Isaac was saying, and I hope is helpful to you, Isaac, is looking at fictioning as a way of dealing with trauma. Thing is, I don't think that you can get rid of you can't deal with the trauma and simply just make any old kind of work. I say that because I've seen that happen with other people who I know. Like, you can try to escape these things that are surrounding you, but the beauty, and perhaps there is chaos within it in some respects, of being able to be a practitioner, is that you have a space in which to perhaps have a conversation. And that's not saying have that on your own, but actually to open that up and to do that through collaboration, by connecting with other people. I just don't really believe in this kind of idea that, you know, the art scene kind of perpetrates, or at least the money-driven side of it, where it's all about this individual enigma. You know, we're far more connected than sometimes we want to admit. And so it's really through conversation, but also I think especially kind of fictioning. You know, there's a lot of stories that I've written, scripts and so on, that, yeah, I've started from my own perspective, or I've started from the perspective of people that I'm very close to or that I know. And that's been a way perhaps of me being able to deal with some difficult conversations, in that I'm not necessarily always physically present. There is perhaps a residue there that I've kind of like left, but I'm not, you know, you throw your body into it too much. I mean, I've seen what it does to people. Like, you won't last. So, yeah.
And that's interesting, because if I reflect on the vantage point of both of you as artists, that Larry, you tend to look, for me, more laterally and more broadly at, you know, what your subject matter is, or at least how you expand upon it. And Isaac, yours is very much internalized about either your own process, or even, you know, the character that you showed in your first film, and how, you know, how he is affected by his environment. It's quite interesting to look at both of those things. But Larry, I just wanted to go back to what you said about the responsibility of being an artist, but also linking that in with the notion of being a traveller in, you know, the Relic series, and this the link of that sense of not belonging.
Yeah. Oh gosh. I mean, so yeah. To tell you a quick story, like I moved out of London about 6 or so months ago. I've been living with my mum for a bit, and you know, looking after her, looking after my younger sister, and decided to you know, rent a live work studio space in a place called oh gosh, it's losing me. Oh yeah, Thurrock. So which is, you know, pretty much Essex, and you know, it's weird kind of being in this environment, but kind of revisiting Essex as somebody who used to kind of live there at the edge of my childhood. And then like this conversation I've been having with myself about, oh gosh, but like, you know, like London is where it's really been at for me, or where I've spent most of my life. And, you know, especially art scene wise, how could I perhaps, like, you know, how can I keep going and be in such a quiet place? Because it's quiet as hell, you know, hearing nothing there. But I think this experience of, you know, the experience of growing up in East London, in Bethnal Green, in the 80s and the 90s, and then just into the noughties before my mum chucked me out, it's a very different environment to the Bethnal Green you see now. It just is. It's not, you know, I couldn't possibly afford to live there. My mum couldn't possibly afford to live there. It's almost like a parallel universe, you know. So there's that strangeness of, you know, growing up in a place where, you know, we dealt with or had to live with racism in the form of, like, you know, National Front or BNP, like marching through there. That was one of the areas, right? To then this other kind of aspect of racism, which is on like the upper kind of class side of pricing people out, pricing out certain communities. And again, of course, it's not exclusive to race. You know, class in itself, you know, you have a lot of white working class people whom they're just like pushed out further and further out. I think that kind of thing has been on my mind as to how perhaps I live as an individual, but then also how that relationship perhaps connects with my children. You know, I think the way that I talk about the planet with them is quite different to the way that, you know, my mum or my dad, especially when they separated, like spoke to me about that. The world didn't feel like it could really open up so much for me. But I'm hoping, or I feel like I'm seeing with the conversations that I'm having with my children, that there is that possibility, and to not feel held or weighted down by you know, a singular kind of place that you live in. And that also has something to do with time, the way that we you know, minds change with time as well. Yeah, sorry, I don't know if that kind of answers or even you know, covers your question.
It does.
Entirely.
It does. Thank you. Thank you.
No problem.
Isaac, just wanted to go back to what the title of your talk was, and obviously the expansion of it within, you know, your time speaking. If our creative process is a learning for ourselves first, is there such a thing as getting it wrong?
Oh, good question. Good question. I would say it depends on what the process is about. And I think in the talk I mentioned when artists kind of are inspired by a theme that can be a bit too all-consuming, and they struggle to find themselves in there, it is quite easy to get it wrong, especially with something as big as racism. But just because it's wrong, I don't think means you can't learn from it. I think we can still identify that there was a mishap or a mistake or a step gone wrong. But how do we then learn from that diverting of walking a path? So I think, yes, it is part of the process. but also when you present that work, which I did, when you present that work as something to be watched, reviewed, and like critiqued, and you package it in an almost infallible way, I think it's good to admit when that isn't the case, because although the work now has completely changed and also exists as like a full-length piece, what I did before is quite different to what it is now. And what I did before was, this is a complete piece of work. And I think once you label it that, yeah, it's important to review it and say, okay, yeah, that was wrong, or that wasn't. I think if it's a continuous creative process that doesn't have a complete outcome, I think it's good to say, well, it's not really getting it wrong as part of the learning process, because there hasn't been a completed outcome. That's how I would, I guess, approach that question. But it's probably something to keep thinking about, to be honest.
Any views on that, Larry?
I don't know, like the thing of like getting it wrong. I mean, yeah, I was just writing it down, and you know, what does it mean? Like, I feel, again, I think there's something very kind of like, there's something very peculiar in growing up in a Western environment that talks about mistakes, where like, you know, you mess up and, you know, like you go through this kind of like redemption kind of space, and, you know, you did wrong, and, you know, you've got to lash yourself and all of this stuff. Like, I don't know, like, of course, it's weird, because I feel like, of course, there are many nuances between myself and Isaac, but I feel like there are things that we could perhaps like have a chat or a drink over, where we've covered together. And I think, no, I would say that there aren't mistakes being made. There's history being made. I'm not trying to say that in some overblown kind of sense, but you're creating a journey that becomes legacy. And yeah, of course, there's always going to be bumpy points with that. But I don't know, like, you know, in terms of mistakes, well, then what's right? Do you know what I mean? How do you measure that kind of barometer? So I think it's really more the question of the journey, and how we decide to how we decide to direct that with what we have and what we don't have, because, you know, not all of us are in that kind of position to make certain things happen within our lives. And, you know, I think also, so the big problem with things such as, you know, racism, classism, and other forms of prejudice, you know, transphobia and so on, the problem is with the oppressors, not the other way around. You know, like, I'm not making this work, you know, to go and like educate white people. Like, I get this sometimes, like, oh, you know, you don't have to talk to white people this way. And I'm like, well, what makes you think that I am? Do you know what I mean? Like, I'm not also therefore at the same time saying that it's just for specific people. But if you do ask me the question, you know, is it important to me that young Black kids are seeing something that they can be like, oh, wow, like I can do something here? Hell yeah. I didn't see that growing up. And if it did exist, then please show me, you know. So no, I don't, you know, I see in what is kind of said, or the phrase of getting it wrong, actually a space for openings, a space for growth, a space for learning, and in the end, it kind of just adding to a journey or a trajectory. You know, yeah, I'm not saying that everything in my practice has been, you know, successful, whatever that means. There's stuff that I'd be like, oh gosh, yeah, I'd rather not think about that. But, you know, without learning, without having that experience, would I be here sitting in front of you, or sitting virtually, I don't know, having a conversation with you all tonight, you know? So, yeah, again, just to try and throw a little bit of positivity there, because it's difficult and we live in really like mad times. But I just, yeah, I hope we get to talk soon, Isaac, because I think there's a lot of crossover.
Fantastic, thank you.
No worries.
Just wanted to, if you don't mind, elaborate. You mentioned about the oppressed just there, and I've got a question here. Someone said that they caught the tail end of you mentioning the plight of trans people and how they are being treated. Do you think that Blacks are conditioned to care about the issue of other marginalised groups more than themselves? And can you imagine
Oh, wow.
that
That's long.
two-pronged question. So, and can you
Yeah.
imagine that trans people would be concerned about the racism faced by Black people?
Oh gosh. All right. Sorry. So can you start with the first question, then I'll break that down, and then because that's a lot.
Do you think that Blacks are conditioned to care about the issues of other marginalized groups more than themselves? And can you imagine that trans people would be concerned about the racism faced by Black people?
Well, I mean, with the question of whether trans people would be concerned with the racism experienced by Black people, I mean, there are loads of Black trans people, you know, so by definition already, like, you know, or at least especially Black trans people, they care about Black folk like across the board. There are people whom of course are trans and queer who have affected me in such a positive way, and you know, how do I say this? Like, you know, when seeing something that is wrong in the form of like oppression, it's important that we use our voices where we can to be allies with that. You know, I'm not saying that I will get it right all the time. I'll probably make mistakes as a you know, cisgendered you know, young Black man. But taking that point in time to listen, actually, I think listening is really important as a result of that. And the thing that I'd like to expand on that with as well is that I would hope that those within, you know, the trans and queer community whom are not Black, you know, listen to those who are, because without those folk, you know, so much in the form of these various pride events and whatnot would not be what they are, you know. And then, sorry, it's the first question that you asked about. Can you say it one more time?
Oh, the first bit, I've got to go back. Where are we? Do you think that Blacks are conditioned to care about the issues of other marginalized groups more than themselves?
Yeah, I mean, in a way, I feel I kind of like have answered that. Yeah, most certainly. I mean, if you look like historically, if you think about, you know, things like the Brixton riots and so on, you know, Black people, we take the brunt of all these like moments of protest and so on, and we tend to feel the violence. You know, if you even look at this point in time with, you know, this kind of like, I don't know, white awakening to like Black Lives Matter, for example. I'm not saying that there aren't white people who haven't been hurt or brutalized. Of course there are. But again, the point is that Black people the world over have continued to be dehumanized and as a result brutalized. And I feel in my travels as an artist, I've had the pleasure of talking with so many Black people and practitioners whom are just so kind and so generous and still open, in spite of the fact that they are facing these various oppressions. And so, yeah, there is a capacity within us as Black people to really, you know, to really care. You know, like it reminds me of like the way that my mum would invite, like, you know, neighbors in, and like some of my friends, and some of them were like racist as hell, like, you know, when we were younger, and she'd make like jollof rice and stuff for them. And like, I remember the first time that happened, I was really brewing. I'm like, why are you doing this for, you know? And, you know, again, like having seen that kind of generosity, not just with the likes of my mum, that for me, there's an understanding that love is very important. That's not saying that, you know, the way out of this all is simply love, because it isn't. You know, equity is important. And of course, that's a whole other conversation. But again, I hope I've answered your question now.
Thank you. Isaac, would you like to add anything?
Yeah, I would jump in and say I wouldn't necessarily agree with the fact that we're more conditioned to care more about other marginalized groups. But I think it's more about the empathy of being an oppressed group or communities, and kind of having that empathetic relationship with other groups who are oppressed. For me, that question kind of brings up another question, which is a bit more less self-reflective, but it's, what are the non-Black communities who have a history of oppression that are deemed allies or are quite vocal whenever there are issues around racism? So like kind of flipping the approach, because it's quite hard to see anything during these Black Lives Matter protests and like kind of moments, because in my perspective, those voices are very, if not sporadic, then non-existent in terms of non-Black communities who are, or who have also been oppressed or have a history of oppression. I think that relationship is quite interesting to question.
Thank you. So I have another question here, more about censorship. It's asking, they said they'd be interested to hear from both of you on self-censorship and how you think of it and how have you worked your way through it?
God.
Or worked through it?
Self-censorship, that's, I don't know, that's a difficult one to answer. Is that in relation to, you know, like exposure of one's life, or self-censorship in terms of like swearing, or
of identity, perhaps, maybe?
Of identity. I don't know, how yeah, go on.
I guess I'm presuming in, I mean, I might be wrong, but the idea of racialized experience and sharing of racialized experience, how much can one share? Not just in relation to trauma, but also in relation to, you know, what is one prepared to share? What does one censor from that? How does one decide what to keep and what to give?
Yeah,
I might be wrong.
I don't know. Of course, that's up to the individual, and I guess that's the good thing of being able to be free enough, or at least in some places, not all places, people have that freedom where you can measure that. You know, I guess the interesting thing is, well, we live in a point in time where, you know, social media is you know, it's what TV was how many decades ago, and so this space of sharing has changed dramatically in how we talk about what we had for dinner last night, or, you know, what we don't talk about that we did. And I mean, one of the hopeful things that I feel about that is people are connecting across networks and so on. I'm trying to focus on the good things here, because it's too easy to just focus on the negative aspects of it. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's pulling me in. But again, you know, when talking about, you know, movements like Black Lives Matter, like how would that be possible with just printed media and television? Like, seriously, like I'm not sure it would gather the kind of ground that it has at this point in time. Would it gather any ground? I'm not saying it wouldn't, but the internet or the digital kind of space allows folk to really get things going. Again, it's not without its caveats, it's not without its problems. I mean, as I speak to you right now, for example, I've been shadow banned for, I don't know, like the 10th or whatever time on Instagram. I follow the rules to a T, like, and yet I've been shadow banned, you know what I mean? And, you know, so there's I think, you know, that of course there's a price to pay for how you decide to, you know, live, and that whole kind of aspect of censorship. I'm being censored within a platform where I'm trying to connect with people and so on. So yeah, I appreciate the question. It's a complicated one. There's a lot going on there. I'd love to hear what Isaac thinks about that.
I mean, for me, I think about self-censorship in the sense of like purely artistic in the spaces where my art has existed, and they've been predominantly white. Regardless of how much I want to share of myself, I'm also aware of the audience that's receiving that. And regardless of the amount of marketing or money you put in your marketing campaign, if you're going to be performing at, say, like The Place or Sadler's Wells, the big majority of that audience are going to be people who aren't like you or think like you. So you're already coming from a different source of information. So the information you're giving, you're having to piecemeal in a sense to make sure there's somewhat of an understanding. So I think self-censorship in that sense is something I struggled with in who am I communicating to with my work? How am I communicating with them? And how do I bring the people I really want to talk to into these spaces? Because outside of these spaces, like Larry said earlier, I'm priced out, you know, it's quite hard to function in that sense. So it's a balancing act, it's a back and forth. But I think what's really special about this moment, both on TV and in other art forms, is now there's even more of an ability of just to present the work for what it is and let it speak for itself. I mean, the biggest moment up to this point has been Michaela Cole's I May Destroy You, and how you wouldn't see that anywhere else. I think place this like 5-10 years ago, and the show would not exist the way it does. And even then, I'd imagine that there was a bit of self-censoring in how much she put in that piece into that TV show. So like similarly for me, I think I'm very aware of how much I can push and how much I cannot, because I'm aware of where I'm presenting this work and who I'm presenting it for. But it's an ongoing dialogue. It is quite complicated as well. But I think the best way I've dealt with it was to kind of return to that root of self-expression and authenticity as much as possible. Because I think it's when you edit the core of what your message is or what your art is, that it becomes an issue. Perhaps the periphery, I wouldn't call it compromise, I'll call it editing, but perhaps the periphery, but keeping that center, that core thing the same, I think is the battle in not being censored or self-censoring.
Yeah, the thing I'd like to quickly add to that again is like what I talked about earlier about, you know, fictioning. That's the space by which, you know, some of the things that perhaps, I don't know, maybe a bit too heavy for one to kind of open up with, that one is able to create a space of conversation, a space of dialogue, but also continuing the, you know, storytelling. Really, there are still things that I want to tell, like life-wise, that are difficult to just simply say about the, you know, how I've experienced that. I may be able to talk about that in time, but as far as how that is done artistically, it's, yeah, one has to perhaps like step back a little bit. Again, like I think it's just really fascinating to hear Isaac say this, because I feel like there's so much that we've experienced that is similar, and yeah, not everything has to simply just be that actual so-called like real point of life. You know, that's why Relic Traveler exists. I mean, yeah, there are so many nuggets in it that it could be an actual reality in the way that kind of Watchmen was of sorts. But at the same time, yeah, you need to be able to put your head down at night. I need to be able to spend time with my family and give them the best of myself. If I'm simply just in that kind of that moment of performing within these spaces, as has been noted, it will just swallow your life away. And art is an incredible thing, but art really is everywhere. It's not just within these gallery spaces or whatnot. You know, for me, one of the biggest places where art is disseminated, I think, is, well, we can't really go there as much nowadays, but the cinema, or like through video games, you know, places that don't require that type of environment, that it excludes far more people than say those environments do. So yeah, thank you for that question.
Thank you. We do have a couple more questions, but we've just passed 9 o'clock. So if you're okay with staying for another 10 minutes, we'll answer those questions as well. Is that okay with both of you?
Yeah, I'm all good.
Fantastic, fantastic. So what we have first, and I will ask you to be brief anyway, just so that we can still keep, you know, not to keep people longer than anticipated. Larry, this question is specifically for you. Can explicit honouring, either to a person or a certain knowledge or time, be a form of protest, especially in art practice?
Oh gosh. I think that comes down to how people respond to it. I don't personally, like, to whoever asked that question, I don't personally go around and say that I'm an activist or you know, that like I try to protest or to do things that I think are right, or to help as many people as possible in the space that I'm in. But that really is an honor that is given to you as a result of how people respond to what you said. And that's not me therefore saying as well that, you know, you just simply do something online for likes for the sake of doing that. But yeah, it's, can you ask that last bit of the question again, please? Because yeah.
Hold on one sec, let me get it back up. Be a form of protest, especially in art practice.
Yeah, right. So, right, really quick story. Like, I'm the third born in my family in the culture that I originate from. The person who's Myansa, or the third, they're the troublemaker. Like, that's all I do. Like, and I feel like that's what I've done in my life. I'm not saying as much as like other people in the art scene. There are other people that I can mention who are doing far more incredible things than me. But yeah, my practice is driven by the desire to ask questions and then to keep prodding and to keep prodding and to keep prodding. And yeah, I think that does, of course, in some respects, perhaps align itself with protest, with not simply relaxing with the way that things are, but actually being critical about them. You know, it's important for us to be critical about the conservative government, like getting kids into schools and opening up pubs and stuff and telling people, you know, you can eat like for half price. And then when the infection rate of coronavirus drives up, oh, we're going to blame young people. Come on, you know, like, so when things that are happening around us perhaps become a point of contention that we try to drive in what we do, and I'm talking about, you know, practitioners, then yeah, I think it can become protest. Is it always that? No. There's some people who want to try and do that, but like, you know, it you know, people get it, people don't manage to think beyond themselves, outside of their own experiences, which is very important. But it's possible, and I'd like to hope that that's something that I'm trying to do.
Thank you. And our final question, which is for both of you, and it reads, I'm interested in your responses to the image and story of Patrick Hutchinson, the Black Lives Matter activist and supporter carrying the so-called counter-protester to safety during the London anti-racist protests. In particular, they're interested in the murals that appeared in places such as Lewisham afterwards, and I can screen share the image that they've shared as well.
Wow.
So I'm interested to know your thoughts.
I'm going to let you go first. It's like, I'm thinking.
I have been following the story, and I think there's such an interesting dynamic here that still kind of maintains the idea of a black as service, like black people being of servitude, if that makes any sense, even in a moment of heightened distress and protest. It's still our onus or our impetus to kind of be of service to others who are in pain or like in need of help, despite of who that person is, who is a racist ex-police officer. But even then, they have the ability to keep their humanity intact. You know, it's a person in need. But the whole irony of all of it is the protest is exactly about that, and how Black people aren't afforded the ability to keep their, you know, humanity intact when it comes to brutality. It's, oh, they were a criminal, oh, they had that one thing that happened donkeys years ago. So I think it's quite ironic how the media have taken this image and pretty much just gone back into the cycle of blackness as kind of service, as like servitude. And I really like this mural because it's it kind of reclaims that, because I think the area used to be is it a BNP kind of stronghold, but they were marched out. So I think, yeah, it's quite powerful in rejecting this imagery, because this is one instance in months and months and months of protest. But yeah, here we are still talking about a black person with a white person, and essentially what whiteness is being upheld. That's what I see. And I think the text on top is quite powerful in rejecting that.
Oh, wow. So I hadn't really seen these, if I'm honest with you. Like I try to like limit how much like I spend online, and I hadn't come across these murals, and in taking the time to perhaps like think a bit about it, it made me think about what I mentioned earlier, in how, you know, my mother when I was younger, you know, would make meals essentially for like young like racists who I knew, and I'm like, what you doing? You know, why are you, or at least I'm saying that to myself. I don't say that to my mum, like she'll deal with me. But, you know, that incredible generosity or ability to be generous in spite of the oppression that is being faced. I think that image alone, regardless of what's been written there, kind of answers that question about whether, you know, black people have that capacity to look after people. That's what we do. That is what we do, you know.
Is that conditioned is the question.
Is that conditioned? No, I don't think, no. I don't think it's, no. Like, I think that, you know, in terms of the thousands and thousands of communities and traditions across the African continent that have made their way across the planet, you know, that I think is a more interesting and important thing to kind of focus on. You know, what I see there in terms of that piece of art, I think that has, there are points in which I agree with it. Yeah, like, you know, you know, racism, fascism, it shouldn't have a place anywhere. Of course it shouldn't. But I can understand why people like Patrick Hutchinson did what it was that he did. Because if that dude died, then imagine what's going to happen to a certain amount of black people when they're on their own. Do you know what I mean? Like, sometimes we don't think about the consequences of certain actions. Do you know what I mean? And I'm not trying to say, oh yeah, therefore let's be good black people. Like, that's not what I'm saying. But I think with every action, there is a consequence. We have to think about what those consequences are and whether we're prepared for those. It's too easy to simply just say something like a meme and put that up there and then walk away. But it's what happens after that really is important. And you know, if there are things to be learned as to, you know, certain histories regarding the Brixton riots and so on, and police brutality that is still going on even here in the UK, right? Black people, we have it so difficult, and that doesn't get the space of being listened to. That was what was so impactful about this moment of Black Lives Matter. It's not simply an American conversation. It's not simply something just across the Atlantic. It's something that affects us as well.
Thank you. Larry Achiampong and Isaac Ouro-Gnao, thank you so much for joining us this evening. Thank you so much for sharing. It's been wonderful. Thank you everyone for joining us. We'll be back again next month. Hope you can join us then. Cheers. I'll see you in the debrief if that's okay.
Sure thing. Take care. Thank you. Good night.
So 20 years later, of course it does what consciousness faded. New generations believe in them fables. Gangsta boogie are true turntables. So no love, so it's easy to hate it. Desecrated by the current and waiting. any given Sunday. So when y'all ready, the slavery, lynching, and them drugs infiltrated. I like that dial shut, you baby. Keep coming back to live love life like I'm crazy. Keep it moving, rising to the top. Duck, touch, clean living, you don't stop. Revolution means change, don't look at me strange. So I can't repeat what other rappers be saying. If you don't stand for something, you fall for anything. Harder than you think is a beautiful thing.